this is just a short video in which I'm going to show you how I cheat and do a sort of a fake marbled paper. In other words, a printed marble paper, but I wax it with beeswax, which really makes it look almost authentic. Well, actually, does make it look authentic. These are two recent books of mine, and they both use the printed marble paper I show. Now, I have done marbling in the past, and I'd like to do some more. In fact, this is one of mine. But the reality is that unless one really invests time in becoming proficient, one can, well, at least my experience is that I can produce some really nice examples, but replicating them isn't easy. And yeah, plus it's really time consuming, and there are just so many things that can go wrong that I found that printing it rather, this is one I scanned and then I printed myself. This is one that I found online that's an historical pattern that's in the public domain, and there's several others of those that I use. I'll put some links down below for places to look, but if you Google, you'll find examples of historical marbled paper that's in the public domain. Now, one could simply, and that is what a lot of people do, simply use a piece of beeswax to polish your paper with. And in fact, that's been done even for original marbled paper. Depends on how it was done. I personally have found that not so easy, and so I've done something different. Now, you can also use this not just for marbled paper, or, well, you can use it for any paper you print out. You can also use it for things like paste paper, or other decorative paper, or really any paper that you want to protect. You can buy a sort of a beeswax paste, or other forms of protective coating. For some things I would also use acrylic medium, but particularly for end pages I find this a very good method. It's involved a bit of trial and error, but I found that what works best is to do half-half, and I use beeswax. This isn't the best piece, but yeah, this is just beeswax that you can get from, I'm almost finished, that's why this is a bit dirty, that you can get from people who do honey and keep bees. The only caveat is if you're using a very light print, you might want to get a sort of more processed white beeswax, because this does leave a slight goldish tinge. For most of my things I quite like that, but yeah, that is a consideration. And then what you do is you melt that down and you mix it with, well, I'm using white spirits. You can use, and I have used, ordinary mineral turpentine. I decided that this is probably a bit purer and better to use. I have also seen recipes for natural turpentine, but a paper conservator I discussed that with was a bit wary of that because of the oil content. So, but yeah, mineral turpentine does work. I just think that this is probably a bit purer. So what I do then is I melt down a mixture. First I'll melt the beeswax in a double boiler, and then I'll add the white spirits to that, and I usually have to put that back on the heat a bit to because when I add it, this sort of starts solidifying, so that add it back on the heat so that they're well mixed, and then take it off and leave it to harden. Well, not harden, but to cool. And that gives you a paste that's fairly soft. This is from some other beeswax, so it's not the same color. And I keep it in, I find it best to use a fairly wide, a jar with a fairly wide rim, so that I can get it in and out easily enough. You do need to be able to keep it closed, because if it's open for a long time, the white spirits will evaporate and it will harden, although then you can melt it down again. So that's what I do. And then what I do is I'll take my printed sheet that I want to apply it to. As far as the printing goes, you'll have to experiment. One point is that this doesn't work well on laser printed paper. As far as I can see, it's only for inkjet paper or other paper that you've somehow colored yourself, but it doesn't work well on the laser. It tends to sort of flake off it when you fold it and things. And yeah, I mean, you'll have to work out yourself with your printer what works best. Sometimes you might want to tweak the colors. I found that some work best on a high quality setting and some don't. It really doesn't matter. So that's trial and error. And what I then do, this is just my method. You might find a better method. You could just take a cloth. I've got a piece of cotton wool inside here. But yeah, a cloth that's fairly lint free. And I'll take a bit and I'll basically just smear it on. You don't want too much, but again, that's something you'll have to work out for yourself. I tend to overdo it sometimes, and it also depends what you're using it for. And you'll see that this also brings out the color of the paper more. If you are planning to laminate your paper or glue it to something else, which I usually do because I make made end pages, that will also bring the color out when the paper gets damp. But the wax certainly does that too. And then I just really try and get it as even as I can. And that should do. And then I'll leave it to dry. Yeah, it'll probably take an hour or two. Basically, drying just means that the white spirits will evaporate, and what you're left with then is a thin coat of beeswax. Okay, I've now got my waxed sheet of printed marble paper, and it's dried. I left it for a couple of hours, I think. Now, this is just how I do it. You could do it in another way, but I just take a cloth, relatively lint-free cloth, that I again wrap around another piece of cotton wool, and I am basically just going to rub it to remove any excess wax and polish it up a bit. I mean, there are polishes and other ways of doing this, but this is just what works for me. So yeah, if I've overdone the wax, then I can remove a bit at this point, but that's a bit of a pain. So this one seems fine. So that's basically it, and that's how I coat my end pages. You could do this for covers. I personally find that acrylic medium works better for covers and wax works better for end pages, but it's up to you. It depends what you're doing it for. So